All right, hey everybody, and welcome to Chiu Stream, where we talk about art and life as an artist. I'm your host, Bobby Chiu. I also have on here my wonderful, amazing friend, Jonathan Hardesty. Say hi, John.
What's up, everybody?
Right on. And today it's a little different. We're always trying to improve, evolve, all that good stuff. I want to show you this. Ah, not that. This. Okay. So when you got some questions, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go to slido.com. You don't need to sign up for an account. You don't need to give a bunch of information. You can just type in hashtag ChewStream1 and then you can put in your questions there. The best thing about this is that we can all kind of self-moderate together and you can vote for your favorite questions. A lot of people, they're like, how come my question didn't get answered? How come my question? Well, now the community can come together and vote on the questions that they want to get answered right away. Okay, and without further ado, here is Jonathan Hardesty and me, and video of John's awesome paintings and awesome textures and everything because he just opened up a brand new class on schoolism. It's,
Oh yeah.
well, why don't you talk about it a little bit, John? What's your
Well, you
class
can see
about?
it. Yeah, well, you can see it there. Well, basically, what I do in this class is break down how to understand textures. So I'm all about getting to the foundation of things and making it very, very practical. So that's really the way that I approach this class. And there's you can go very heavy technical in terms of the scientific approach and things like that, and all of that is very useful. But for me, the way that I approached it was to say, what visually can I do to break this down? Not necessarily going into all the science, not necessarily going into all that, but I saw a lot of artists doing quick paintings, doing speed paintings, doing stuff like that. And I could tell they had this underlying knowledge of how that particular texture worked that they were painting and all of that. And I wondered how they got that. So I started really exploring it and I figured out my way and my system of how to break that down, break each texture down and understand how to it's understanding how to sort of manipulate it and change it to what you want and also see the similarities between other textures. Basically, the whole point of all this is to get to the point where you have a library in your mind of textures that you can whip out whenever you want and say, okay, I'm painting this particular vehicle. I want it to be a skin covered vehicle. Or I want it to be a grass covered vehicle, or I want it to be metallic. And you'll understand visually how to do that in a real practical sense and be able to utilize the information, not just know it scientifically. So that's the class, really.
That's really awesome. And just to get people into the whole Slido thing here, um, Marvin Marbles asks the first question. What was
Marvin
the
Marbles, I like
first
that.
texture that you found really hard? For me, that was skin,
Ooh.
I think. Skin was something that I had a difficulty kind of understanding. And the difference between light skin and dark skin, that got really confusing to me as well. Do you remember the first textures for you that you found hard?
Skin was definitely a tough one. So I'm going pretty far back. I'm trying to think of like the first texture that I found really hard when I started just doing this whole batch of textures that you see here was a little bit different than when I first started. So when I first started painting, I think skin was a big one for me. It was totally mysterious. I used to go to the museum and see how Sargent did it. How did you do? I would say out loud, like sometimes the guard would look at me strange because I'd say out loud, "How'd you do that, Sergeant?" Because I'd get so mad. But my skin tones would be too light or too dark, and the colors would be bland, and that was really tough. But what I found when I was doing this whole batch of textures, where I just started really breaking everything down and into sections, I found that man-made objects and also things that had a lot of repetitive shapes on them were very difficult to deal with. Something that, so for instance, if I have a round sphere and I have to put a pattern or a design on it that's very uh,
Exact.
organized or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, or something that's then having that curve back in space and also get darker. Like for instance, like the skin of a strawberry, where it's got all the different seeds and different things like that. That kind of a thing becomes very difficult. So that's one of the things that I'm proud of with this class is that I'm going to be talking about that, how to deal with that, how to make it much easier, especially in Photoshop. Some ways to really give you a good starting point that you can then paint custom or paint by hand over top of it. Because I didn't want to have to do a texture and paint every tiny little dot on something or every tiny little scale on a snake or something like that. So you have to find ways to give yourself a good starting point, and then you work up from there.
Now, one of the most fascinating, and actually, before I get into that, something that people should know is that I see a lot of portfolios. I go around to all these different places. I see all these portfolios from all over the world. And one of the most common things that people don't have in their portfolios is material indication. And what I mean by that is texture. So people would paint skin the same way that they're painting metal and clothes
Right.
and all that stuff. Sometimes that's okay. If you're, say, working on something like something very 2D, like The Simpsons, for example, you don't need to
Right.
have metal texture as hardcore. Obviously, you can paint in the same flat color for skin and do the same kind of flat texture for clothes, and that's fine. But if you're doing anything else, so movies, animated or live action nowadays, they all have huge amounts of texture indication. Video games, a lot of illustrations, but especially video games, uh, movies, live action, and animation. If you're a concept artist, then you need to indicate the material so that down the line everybody understands your concept, right?
Definitely.
So that's a huge part about it. And the very interesting thing that I found with your class that I would love for you to kind of share is you actually broke things down into a way that is very understandable for everybody. Like, how do you compare snake texture to like iron or uh, gel, or like you have 8 different categories for people to think about, to really get those material indications to a level that everybody can understand. You have things like weathering. You have things like
Mhm.
what do you remember all of them? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
No, no, it's okay. I think I do. I'd have to go through and I tend to think they're the 8 simplified kind of versions of it. There's more that you can go to in your head. And actually, too, one of the things I want people to learn from it too is you can create your own sort of diagram or however you want to approach textures. And really the most important thing is to learn how to break it down and what to think about it. But yeah, I've got local value. I've got weathering. I've got edge breakup. That's an interesting one that people won't be expecting, and that has to do sort of with the silhouette and all of that. Let's see. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I'm trying to think of all 8. Yeah, I have. It's funny. I know.
I know
I
I
made
totally put you on
cards.
the spot.
No, no, it's fine. It's fine. I should. It's funny, but maybe I've been having them in front of me so much but I can sort of talk through all of it. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's different applications of all the information as well. So like for instance, like weathering. Sometimes weathering shows up in the light section, in between the light section and the dark section. Sometimes it shows up as a different color. Like let's say you had a copper, right? And you have some weathering of the copper. Well, if you have weathering of copper, it shows up as green over top of that. So that's a key part of understanding how copper weathers. And so there is sort of like a you can mix and match between them, but
You know what?
but
I'll
yeah,
help everybody out by putting it on screen right now. Uh, that way they can kind of uh, take a look at it and copy them down. Okay? Just give me 1 second
oh
here.
yeah, no problem.
Boom. Okay. So we got um, from the top, we got reflectivity. Okay, and this is the image that I have on screen right now. This is talking about iron specifically, but the 8 categories that John has broken up for us is reflectivity. How reflective is the texture? Gloss level, age and weathering, transparency, silhouette, edge breakup, local value, and color. And I thought about many, many different textures and tried to kind of like poke holes in your
Oh, this is
categories
interesting.
here, but it was actually pretty legit. So um, it'd be interesting to see if anybody else can kind of think of is there any
Right.
other super important, category important enough that these eight categories don't actually cover. I kind of feel like these are the core eight categories.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, you can break it down to, I mean, you literally could break it down to probably 1,000. A scientist could probably break it down to 1,000 or something. So the challenge is always for me, and this is always what drives me. I always like to simplify things because I want to be able to take the information with me and take it in my pocket. And so if I have when I talk about values and I break it down in my other class, I talk about a 5 value system. So can you have a 10 value system, 12, 16? Yeah, you can have all of that, but for me, I like to start with the 5 value system because it's just the simplest way to do it. And it also forces you to focus on the major things when you simplify something. So for me, those were the 8 that I found, like you said, are kind of the biggest bang for your buck when breaking something down. And that's really good for me to hear you say that. I was curious what you're going to say when you brought it up, like whether you found any holes in it or anything like that, because I did really think from a visual standpoint, purely from a visual standpoint, I tried to break it down into what I thought would be the key things that you need to think about when it comes to representing a texture visually. So
I thought
that's what I focused on.
I thought silhouette was very interesting. That was one that I didn't
Hmm.
think of, but when you actually think about textures and yeah, silhouette is very important. How are you going to describe the texture of the leaves in a tree, for example?
Right.
And what also is very interesting is that it works in many different ways. So if you are painting a tree from very far away, you're talking about a different texture than if you're painting up close, and then you can see the
That's right.
definition of all these leaves and everything.
That's right. And if you anybody that's tried to paint a tree, let's say you're painting a pine tree and you make it a really hard edge around the outside, very crisp and sort of rounded, unless you're trying to be stylistic, which is fine, but if you're not trying to be stylistic, if you're trying to be more realistic, it won't look like a pine tree. It doesn't matter what you do. And the real aha moment happened with me with trees and also with hair. So my daughter Pippin she has really curly hair like me and it's just all over the place, right? So when the sun is when the sun is behind her, I can see all the strands and all these hairs shooting off in all directions. And if I took that away and made it very flat and straight, it would look like she had straight hair. The texture wouldn't read correctly. It would read really strange. So I started to realize that silhouette was such a massive part of it, and it was really a surprise for me too when I started to realize I started painting different things, and I thought, wow, if I can ruin this by not getting the edge to look correct. Even something like scales on a snake, if you imagine a sphere with snake skin on it, the outside is not going to be perfectly smooth and crisp like a a billiards ball or like a pool ball or something like that. It's not going to be crisp like that. It's going to have little divots and little deviations, and they're going to need to line up with where the scales are on there. And if you don't line them up, it won't read correctly. It will read strangely. So yeah, there's a lot of different little considerations like that I'm going to talk about in the class, and more textures are going to be released as time goes on, and it's going to be an ongoing thing, which is really exciting for me that we can just keep them coming and keep I'm going to keep cranking them out. It's going to be awesome.
It's a great practice for people as well to, have a few weeks to really try to understand the first
Hmm.
set of textures before the next set of textures gets added to your course. So that'll be very
Absolutely.
interesting. Now, obviously, we are art geeks. Like, we are geeking out over texture for the last, 15, 16 minutes.
I
So,
love it.
yeah, if you're heavy into art and everything, then this totally must be a joy for you. But of course, for the not so hardcore, the other streams that we do are probably they might be more interesting to you. I don't know, but yeah, for all the real hardcore artists, this is right up your alley, I assume. Um, a lot of people have been using Slido. Slido is okay. I got
Such a cool
nothing.
thing.
I got no part in Slido or anything. This was a website that we used in Copenhagen at the Schoolism workshop not too long ago, and it worked out really great. So that's why we're using it. And I can see a whole bunch of people writing in questions through Slido. So let's just go to the top one. Okay, the
This
top
is so
one
cool.
right.
They can vote on it. I love it.
Yeah, that's the best. I don't got to look for really good questions or whatever, and the audience can decide themselves. So, anonymous. And you can also ask questions anonymously. Anonymous asks, what are the best practices to strengthen your visual memory for drawing from imagination?
Hmm. So, so why don't you start with this? Because I'm curious. I want to know what you would say
Sure.
for drawing from imagination.
I've heard of a really good practice that is very challenging. It would be challenging for pretty much anybody. And this comes from Oscar nominee Robert Valley. He said when he did life drawings, you would draw people, whatever, but he would take these life drawings home and then try to rotate them.
Hmm.
That obviously will start to trigger your imagination. You'll have to
I love
start to
that.
create things. But at the same time, you just saw the model. You still have somewhat of a memory of that model, and you have a drawing to go by. So it's not totally uh, from just your imagination. Instead, you're given a little bit of help, and it's still super challenging. Another one is
Yeah,
from
that's
Wouter
tough.
Tulp in one of his lessons in one of his classes, Expressive Characters. Uh, the practice is to draw the pose in the mirror image. So you're looking at some
Hmm.
reference, right? And then you have to draw the mirror image. And when you do that, again, you get some help, but you have to trigger a lot of that imagination and figuring out if your character still works. What about you, John? Do you have any others you want to add to this?
Yeah, I've done visual memory stuff all throughout my career for because a lot of times I would be out painting a landscape or painting someone's portrait, and so you have to look at them. And then I actually set up my easel so it's pretty far in front of me. So I step back and look at the model, and then I step forward and place my mark, and then I step back and compare, and then I step forward and place my mark. I don't have it right there next to me where I can look back and forth real quickly like that. I don't. I like the painting to look pretty rendered about 5 or 6 feet back, but then when you get up on it to look a little bit more loose. So that's the way that I've worked, and it naturally sort of suits that. So there's a little bit of visual memory there, but I have this whole sheet that my teacher gave me when I was studying where it has these shapes, and you actually trace one side of the shape, and you imagine it putting it on the window and then tracing one side of the shape, and then you take that paper off to the side, and you finish the shape over here. You look at it, make any kind of notes mentally that you need to, and then you flip that paper over, and then you draw it over here. And then that's the first step, but then you could draw it at a larger size or a smaller size. But again, that's more based on capturing what you're seeing more specifically. But for imaginative stuff, I think when you when you're observing, you learn different ways to break it down. Then you can repeat it later on. So if you're looking at someone's body, you would imagine how their body is broken down structurally, and then you give yourself mental cues. Okay, well, their torso has this sort of a slope to it, or it's this size compared to the legs, or it's this and that, and then you make all these mental notes, and then you might be able to piece that together later on, along with your pure visual memory of what they looked like or whatever. You can piece all of that together and think about it from a different perspective, like you said, a different angle. And same with sort of with textures. That's kind of what I'm doing in the class, where I'm breaking it down so that I can use it later. And you break it down to those essential things, and you could then repeat it later from imagination. And I think you can do the same thing with a pose, with a face, with anything. It becomes very, very challenging, as you said, really, really challenging. But focus on the major things, not the minor things, and you'll be okay.
I love the question though, because it's it goes along with the flavor of this stream here, which is like for extremely
Right.
geeky art, nerds that just love to get into it. Another really good one that totally works that I do myself, which is study whatever the heck you want to study. Okay, so if it's Chrome right now and you're trying to really understand Chrome, paint that chrome sphere or whatever it is, but do it in a way where you know that tomorrow you will not be able to look at the reference and you have to paint it again.
Hmm,
It's a different level. It's kind of like when
for
people
sure.
say, teach, what is it? You teach once and you kind of learn it twice, or you learn something,
I
the
know what you're saying.
saying.
I know what you're
When you're
saying.
trying to
Yeah, yeah,
learn something and you're thinking, okay, I got to teach this the next day, you're going to pay much more attention to it. You're going to be doing it
right.
at a different level. And so
Totally.
that's the thing I would say to really, copy stuff or whatever, study stuff, but do it in a way where you have to do the same thing tomorrow without even looking at it. And then most of all, you got to do it. You got to do that tomorrow, and not look at
And
anything.
it's uncomfortable. Like when you go to it, you'll get a really good result the first time or whatever, and then you have to do it the next time. It's going to be way worse, and you have to be ready for that. Drawing it in a different angle or drawing it reversed or just drawing it from memory or painting it from memory in general. It's gonna be worse the second time. You have to wrap your mind around that because it can be very easy to say, "Oh, I'm not going to do that side of it because it's not going to turn out the greatest." And I even do that with master copies as well. If I'm doing a master copy of someone, I will try to copy every tiny little thing that they've done and try to get it in the same order that they've put it down. I try to
Mm.
figure out how they laid things down, and then I'll do a painting that is a new painting by them. So I'm pretending it's like a painting that they made that no one has seen before, and I'm trying to do that. And hopefully, if I'm successful, and which is really super difficult, but let's say I do a fetching portrait study or a master copy, and I copy it exactly, and then I try to make a new fetching painting that no one's ever seen before, and then I really understand with my own subject matter or my own whatever, I understand how to utilize all that info. So anytime you do something like that where you learn something or you're observing something and then you go at home and try to use it in a different way and you're just doing it based on memory and different things, it's gonna be crappy the next time you do it. And it's okay. You just gotta work through it to get better and better at it.
One thing I did want to mention though is that just like any muscle in your body, uh, the ability to do all these exercises are things that you can really increase. You can get stronger in.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
always use that example of taxi drivers in London. They know every frickin' street,
Right.
So it's either all of these people that have tremendous spatial, memory and navigation and all this stuff, they just happen to all want to be taxi drivers in London, or it's a whole bunch of
Right.
ordinary people, you know, wanting to have a job and becoming a taxi driver and then slowly training their brains to remember more and more and more.
Exactly, exactly. And there was a Russian school I heard about. I don't know if they're still doing this, but they had models on one floor and their easels on the second floor. So the students would look at the model and they could go up and down however many times they wanted, but they'd have to look at the model and then run up to the next floor and put down marks on their paper, and then they'd run back down to observe. And so they'd have to remember not only what the model looked like, but they'd have to remember when they went back down to the model what their actual drawing looked like. And so they had to keep going back and forth. And everybody said when you first started there, it was just you're pulling your hair out. Everyone was just kind of throwing their hands up, like, how is this going to happen? And then the people that were in their last year there felt really comfortable and could do great drawings. And then, if the model moves a little bit, if the light changes a little bit, they're completely unfazed. Oh yeah, I remember that pose from the other day. I could just slip that arm right on there or something like that. They were completely unfazed.
There's a lot of Frankenstein happening in a lot of artists' minds, don't you think? Like putting
I
on new
think so.
skin, putting on this pose of this hand that they just know from like some hardcore project where they had to really understand that hand pose and things like that. Or
Absolutely.
you see it all the time with comic book artists. They got such huge deadlines. All of a sudden, you can tell almost like who drew what by the hand poses that they do, like some
Right.
foreshortening kind of
Right.
thing, straight
Right.
at you.
Right.
It's like, oh, that's such a Jim Lee hand over there, and that's
Right.
such a
Right.
McFarlane hand. Uh, the next question is kind of the same thing. This is also from Anonymous. He was saying, or this person was saying, how would you go about from an isolated study to applying it into an imaginary object, I often feel I'm falling short and copying instead of implementing. I'm just going to archive that one since that's pretty much the last question. Now, this stream is somewhat of a transition. You know, people are asking questions in the chat, but they're also using Slido. Okay, in the future, I think the Slido thing, I think that's pretty darn good. I think that's where we're headed. But let's answer a couple questions from just the chat. Okay, John? So,
Sure.
Maro asks, hey, John, are you going to upload some material lessons on Liquid? I've already watched all 4 lessons on your new texture class, and they're amazing. Gold one is my favorite at the moment. Cheers. So, Liquid.
Yes, yes, and that is actually coming very, very soon. It's funny that you say that. And Mauro, if you guys don't know, it's a big honor if you're learning something from my class. He is a beast of an artist, absolutely a beast. If you guys haven't seen his work, he's fantastic. So it's really cool that you're studying that and getting a lot from it, Mauro. But yeah, the liquids are coming. They're coming next. We've got, I think the next lesson, I just said it, I guess, but
Sure, yeah,
that's okay. Yeah,
do
so we've
whatever.
got blood, slime. We've got different things coming down the coming down the road, which is going to be really good. And so one of the things that was really uh, tricky for me was I thought, well, how do you make something look wet? So then I figured out how to make something look wet. Well, what's the difference between something looking wet like a dolphin, or slimy like a slug? And we know the difference. We look at a dolphin, we don't say, "Oh, look, it's got so much slime on it." We don't think that. But you look at a slug and you can even tell that it's slimy before you even touch it. And
Hmm.
so how is that happening? And how can we make the distinction? So that's the next one. I think if I'm not mistaken, that's the next one coming
That
down the
gets
road. So that's
really
gonna be
juicy though. Like, talk about geeking out on art nerdy stuff. That makes me think, okay, then what about slime on top of iron or on top of a
right,
snake skin? Then how do we really talk about that texture? Because is it
right,
now a combination of textures, which yeah, it kind of is. But does it also, go along with your 8 categories? So say it was a slimy, uh, rock, for example. Then can we
right,
still talk about reflectivity? Yes, right? Because now
right.
the rock is more reflective because of the slime, I guess. Is that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah? And then
Sure,
gloss
sure.
level. We could talk about gloss level as well. Age and weathering, would we need to talk about the age of the slime and the age of the rock?
Right,
Right?
right.
This is
Exactly,
starting to
exactly.
make me like think a lot. Transparency, there would be a level of transparency in the slime, but low to zero transparency on the rock. And then the silhouette, would that change? Would,
Right, and it would.
yeah, but then also, would you see 2 different silhouettes then?
Right,
Is that how
right.
we need to kind of tackle that, right?
And the cool part about slime is that slime oftentimes will distort the silhouette of the object that's underneath it. So
Mm.
one of the big things I looked at for inspiration for the slime was this fish called a hagfish, and it looks like something out of Alien. It's disturbing to me, and it produces these insane amounts of slime. And when they catch it and they put it in a bucket, it's just, I mean, they can reach their hand and it looks like movie slime, and it distorts what's behind it. So I talk a little bit about that. So you can see overlap in shapes. You can really, there are overlap in textures. I mean, not in shapes. You can see overlap in textures. Like one texture, you might be able to utilize some of that information from another one. Oh, it changes the color, or it changes the silhouette, or it distorts it, and then the glossiness is kind of similar to this, or like that. So once you start to get you start to create a whole bunch of different textures, you start to understand how to break them down. And that's my hope for people with this class, is that over time they begin to build that language and sort of that vocabulary of texture. So then they can mix and match and do this stuff on their own. Then they can say, "Oh, I remember I did slime, and I'm going to make it a little thinner. I'm going to make the slime a little bit thinner. So what do you do to do that? You you change the silhouette a little bit, maybe you change the gloss factor, there's a number of little things you could do perhaps to get a different effect, and maybe I want it to look thicker, so maybe I'll make the silhouette behind there, the rock that's behind it in your example, make that even more distorted, and then it looks like it's thicker slime, or et cetera. That sort of thing. That's my hope, is that everybody takes the information and just can run with it over time.
Yeah, as I start thinking about it, I'm like, wow, there is so much to textures that people don't really usually think about. Well, a lot of times they're not even thinking about textures for a lot of the more beginner artists, or things like that.
Right.
But then there's also like, I just lost my train of thought as I was reading this next question. You know
Yeah,
what?
it's hard to read them, and it really is very difficult.
I was reading the question. And I was thinking I shouldn't be reading this question because I'm talking right now, and now it's completely gone. So why don't we go to the next question here? Next question says, this is from Anonymous, and this is from Slido again. So keep using that Slido, guys. This is great. Anonymous asks, was hoping to specialize in costume art like Bobby does with creatures, but I'm having trouble finding the top artists in costume design to study. Any ideas?
Hmm,
Well,
costume design.
costume design, one of the people that I'm bringing with me to hopefully Florence. So there's another little, um, what's it called? Another little surprise we
Little plug.
haven't announced
Yeah.
yet. Philip Boutet Jr.
Hmm.
Philip Boutet Jr. has a IMDb, list of credits like longer than my leg. He has worked on, I'm sure it's over 100 movies now. He's younger than me, I
Wow.
believe. He's worked on every superhero movie, pretty much. From the
Sheesh.
DC ones to the Fox ones with X-Men, to the Spider-Man ones with Sony, to the Marvel movies, to Inception, to
Wow.
working with Madonna with her costumes on tour and stuff like that. Talk about the ultimate person to study costume design. Study from him. But I also want to mention, where does he study from? Not all the time, but he did mention his kind of secret stash of goodies where he gets a lot of his info from. It's this place, it's this building. There's a lot of buildings like this around the world. It's this place called a library.
Remarkable.
Yeah, yeah. Like, library? What is this place you're talking
No
about?
one goes to the library anymore.
Nobody goes to the library, and all of a sudden it's like the secret stash, because you can get old magazines, right? Like
Mm,
legitimate old magazines, and flip through them. Look at the styles, look at the costumes. I thought that answer was hilarious, but actually super helpful.
yeah, that's
Where do
really
you
good.
go? Where do you go to find your juicy, reference that nobody really knows about? Do you have a place like this?
I I like you gave me a suggestion a long time ago, and I've been using it, is the video suggestion, where you find video so you can find a frame that nobody else
Yes.
looks for. That's really good. So I've used that since you said that to me. I was like, "Oh, that's really good. I'm going to use that." I do have a whole bunch of old books that I actually will look through, and I really like that a lot. And a lot of times, if I can do it, if I can find it in reality, I would much prefer that. I would much prefer that. So sometimes I can find a texture on something or whatever, something that I'm looking for, maybe not in the same place that I would normally find it. It's maybe a lampshade has the look of what I need for a shirt or something. I don't know. It's something like that. And I'm always on the lookout that way. And so I like to find things in reality. So sometimes you can just go to a store like Goodwill or something like that. It depends on what you're looking for. It depends on what you need. But if you need animal information, go to the zoo and
I wonder
go to
if you
the
could
zoo
write
and
that kind of stuff off. Like if I'm studying costumes, does that give me the ability to buy a lot of new clothes?
oh yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know about the buying, but I certainly know you could go to a fashion show and write that off. Or if I go and I just even do like a little sketch of something at the zoo, yeah, I can write that off too for sure.
Because I
Absolutely.
remember our accountant one time saying, how come there's a there's movie stubs in here? And then we're like, well, we needed to research, and then kind of like he was new at the time. And then he was like, well, yeah, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I went to the beach with my family and I asked the accountant, I said, well, I was working while I was there. I said 3 or 4 days of the 5 I was there, I worked a little bit, and I said, and I did, some paintings and did that. And she said, yeah. She said, you did work while, she said, I can't claim your family's stuff, like what my kids were doing, like them riding roller coasters there or something like that. And I said, oh, of course not. I said, but the trip down, she said, yeah, the trip down and like where you stayed and all that. Yeah. So yeah, it works.
Obviously, this is not an accounting podcast, so
No,
you
I
want
think
to
people would
check.
like to hear that. I think people
Yeah.
would like to hear that because you need to know that stuff as an artist. You need to.
No, but yeah, you should definitely check those. What I'm saying. I also heard of one where a friend of mine, he was doing a period project, and so he bought all these really cool high-end automobiles, like little like miniature,
Oh, okay.
automobiles, but they're very high end and they cost a lot. He bought
Right.
like hundreds of dollars worth, uh, and then he wrote them all off because he had the paintings to support the fact that he
Right.
did use them for an art
Totally.
project.
Totally. Totally. And those would be super useful.
Yeah,
Very useful.
definitely. Why don't we go back to the chat questions? Okay, so the chat questions. Um, let's go to Joel Santana. My paintings, personal work, often changes quite a bit from sketch to final painted piece. Is that a bad thing? I'm worried that I'm not good at making a decision and sticking with it. That is a really good question,
That is a good question.
and probably a super simple answer. If you're doing it for yourself, it doesn't matter. If you're
That's right.
doing it for somebody else and they wanted a pig and now you gave them a chicken, there's gonna be problems.
Right. That's exactly what I would say too. And as a fine artist, you get to do a lot for yourself, which is why I've grown more towards the, oh yeah, this will morph along. I work with the painting as I go. And so I lean more that direction. And I'm not afraid to scrape something off and redo. I still like to go through the process of doing a design for the composition and do thumbnails and do all that. I like, and color studies and value studies and things like that. Like you said, especially if someone is requesting it. But I have done some portrait commissions and done some painting commissions, and yeah, they would, it would be very strange if all of a sudden I say, oh yeah, I thought it was a really good artistic decision to put like a hot pink background in here, and and you make some bold decision. You can't do that. Yeah, you can't do that to people. So yeah, I think you should be able to do both. You should be able to do both. Yeah, I think that would be a good, if you can't stay consistent with your initial idea at all, then that will cause you problems, I think, in some way, shape, or form.
A really good way to keep a director happy is if your sketch really translates to your final piece though. Because then they'll look at it and go, "Okay, this is what I expected. Plus
Hmm.
it looks finished now, so bonus." But if
Hmm.
it drastically changes, then there'll be a lot more like, "Whoa." And if that is your method though, and that's the method you kind of want to stick to, then what I suggest is if you're working for other people, like clients or whatever, to have a sample piece for them to look at. And I do this as well. I have a sample piece that I'll give to directors. Here's my sketch, and this is how it's going to translate later on to, grayscale painted version or whatever. And then this is how it's going to translate to the final version, right?
Right.
So then they can understand your sketches a little bit better.
Yeah, if it's somebody working on a movie, you can just say, look, you and I both know that you have a script and that's going to change 6,000 times before the movie's over. Same thing for the drawing and painting. Because there's changes mid-process so much. I mean, there's a lot of that they change. And so there's an acceptable amount. Obviously, you take a whole character out and now you've cost the studio tons of money or something like that. So there's a line that you can't cross, and so it's interesting.
Let's go on to another Slido question here. I'm really liking Slido, everybody. I hope you guys are into it. Let us know in the chat if you do like it or not, because for me, this is so much easier. So much easier. Lamp asks, with so much to learn and we must constantly review to keep our skills sharp, as a professional, is there still knowledge you have to prioritize over new ones?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think you have to prioritize whatever's coming down the pike. I think if you have a project that's coming up and it tends to be like that for me. So what am I working on next? What am I doing next? Then that prioritizes what I need to learn. I would like to learn everything. I would sit down with someone for a year and learn how to knit like the greatest, knitter in the world or something. I would like to do that, but I just can't. I can't. So because it wouldn't be as useful for me as an artist. It would be useful, but it wouldn't be directly relatable, for what I do. And so I find that whatever I'm working on or whatever I've decided to work on, those types of things, I have to work on that. So if I had a bunch of paintings in the queue of horses or of landscapes, then I would need to focus on that. That tends to be the way that I function. Is that the way that you function too, depending on what project you're doing, or?
I feel like with every skill that I develop, it's kind of like um, kind of moving something up a hill, right? And
Right.
this thing, it's not a huge slopey hill, but once you let go, it starts to slowly roll back
Mm,
down. Not nearly as fast as you pushed it up, but if you kind of neglect it for too long, then you gotta roll that ball back up the hill again.
hmm
It's a constant, but
I could see that too. Yeah.
that's the coolest thing about art is that it's kind of like this intangible thing. You cannot keep it, right? You can't keep these skills. You gotta keep nurturing it. You gotta
Right.
keep growing them. Uh, for me, the other thing is that in the last bunch of years, I've had to do the same stuff. So then you get used to certain things. And then you can get away with not really knowing or not really practicing some other things. So for example, yeah, I'm doing character design, creature design. I'm not going to really put any of those characters into these hardcore perspective poses where I'm thinking of some wide angle lens and blah 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 and all this stuff. But that's really important stuff to me. I like those kind of things. So the things that you like, if they start slipping, then that's the stuff that you kind of put attention to.
Mhm.
That's how I kind of look at it, and it never
Yeah.
ends.
Yeah, it's true. It never ends. And I mean, it's the same with musicians. You'll see musicians traveling to different parts of the world so that they can listen to different types of music, and then they incorporate a little piece of that and they throw it in, and maybe they leave some of it behind. And same way with art, you have different techniques and different things that you like and study, and you'll grab a little piece of this here and a little piece of that there, and then you'll say, "Oh yeah, I haven't painted or drawn a car in this many years. I need to do that." And so then you start doing some things with cars, and you're shaking off the rust when you first do it, and it's just being aware. I think when I first started in my career, I found something that worked. I started painting some still lives and things like that, and they started working. So I just started pumping out these still lives, and I saw a lot of other artists doing that, and a lot of fine artists actually still they do that. They make their most money by just doing that same thing over and over again. And I started to see that number one, I didn't like what I was becoming because I was just pretty good at this one thing. And also, if I thought to myself, if sales start dropping off with this, I'm pretty much done. If I only know how to do this, if I'm the quote still life painter and still lifes fall out of fashion, then I'm sunk. Then I'm nothing. So I thought this isn't good. And plus, it wasn't fun to me because I had figured out a lot of at least the way that I was doing. I had figured out a lot of that, and so I didn't want to keep doing the same thing that I figured out. And it feels comfortable at first. It feels nice, but it's unsatisfying in the end because you need that challenge. You need that drive to keep getting better, and you have to keep doing that, or you'll end up hating art. I think you really will. If you don't try to grow as an artist, you'll end up hating it.
Yeah, I kind of I wonder if it's with everybody that we have kind of like a problem of not being satisfied all the time. Like something is great for the first 10 months, and then all of a sudden it becomes
Right,
regular, and you don't have that same kind
right.
of, you know, is that with everybody, you think, or is that just with like, I assume that must be with kind of highly productive people, people that are constantly moving, constantly growing, perhaps with others as well, people that can't stand still and they can't get anything done and because their attention is going all over the place. But for a lot of like high level people, uh, things get normal and they get less kind of attractive to to keep doing over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a trait that I've seen in people that usually are at least trying to keep to grow and get better. One thing I've seen is that they just yeah, they like the process of learning and growing. And so when that stops, it becomes a little bit more boring. So it's always the process. I've really fallen in love with the process. And so when even if I haven't sometimes well I will say it this way. Sometimes I think I've learned what I needed to learn and I didn't, and I needed to go back and look at it in a fresh way to learn more about it. And that's what as I've gotten older, the thing that I've gotten a little bit more wise about is understanding how to go back and revisit the same material but revisit it in a different way.
Wow, that's really
And
golden. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah, well, that's what's so great about schoolism is that it's the same stuff, and then you hear this boss of an artist talking about the same stuff. Because like, when I get together with people, we're all talking about the same stuff. We have the same language. Maybe we might call it something a little bit different. I might call it values, they might call it whatever. But then there's, like, this little thing where you're like, "Oh, man. Yeah, they're totally approaching that differently," or they're and you start to see, wow, there's more to this thing that I thought was really simple, and I thought, foolishly that you had at least somewhat of a handle on it.
Once we get into kind of like just feeling like this is the everyday grind, I've done this a million times, that's when you need to shake things up because like
Mhm.
I've interviewed so many high level artists, and the ones that keep moving up and up and up or stay at the top, these are people that are just ever improving artists. They're always painting with the intention of doing better than their last,
Right.
average.
Right.
And
Right.
if you have that in mind, then you're on the right track. Everybody that's listening, have the intention to always try to do better than your average, because that's always been like a common trait I've seen with really great artists.
I always call it when students have the good enough syndrome. That's what I would tell my students. Say, when you get the good enough syndrome, and it's fine. Sometimes there's a certain project that you're working on, and you say, okay, I have to abandon it now. But as long as you're aware of what the flaws are and things like that, and all that, it's not like every piece has to be measurably like loads better than the last one. Sometimes you go back a little bit and sometimes you try something and it doesn't turn out the greatest, or sometimes you just make mistakes. But I always tell students, if you have the mentality, this is good enough. I don't need to get better. If that sort of saturates your thinking, then it's not really too good. And a lot of times when I see newer artists taking critiques from people who have been around for a while and have worked on things for a while, they will tend to react very strongly to that because they have the mentality that it's pretty good, it's good enough. And so they think, "Well, my work's good enough." And you shouldn't be I don't think you should be totally self-deprecating. I don't think you should think everything you do is horrible. I think you should just look at it for what it is and say, "How can I make this better?" And if somebody's saying something that can help you make it better, then you should be looking at it with that in mind, and it would change your response, I think. And so, yeah, I think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind.
Right on. So next two questions, one's for me, one's for you. Okay, so
Okay.
the one for me from Julia: do personal projects count as experience on a resume? It can, it can definitely be very helpful. I tell a lot of people, if you're in one kind of genre of the industry and you want to get into another, like from animation to live action, do personal projects. You gotta, make a whole entire new portfolio if you really want to take it seriously. But if you did it for work, it becomes even more kind of important. It becomes even more valued because work has time limits, work has direction from the client, and things like that. So that becomes a lot more important. And the question for John comes from June like the month. Oh, that's funny. June like the month. Okay, I got it. Okay. Uh, John, do you have to have a good understanding of color to be able to take in the information from your texture class? That's a good question.
That is a good question. And no, I would say no, because we're going to be talking about it a lot in there. And I think it will illuminate a lot of the understanding of color when you start to break it down that way and see different things. For instance, you saw iron up there, and you guys saw the classification for iron. It was desaturated. So I go into that and I start talking about that. It's desaturated. I talk about having a warmer transition here on skin and different things like that. Of course, with blood, there's specifics of color as well. When it's light in the lighter sections of the blood, it changes color a little bit, just slightly, and it changes value, and there's a different slant here and there. So there's a lot of those discussions that happen. It's not going to be a class where I go in depth about color and start talking about the intricacies of color and things like that. But I think it's fine. I think you'll be able to roll with it, and it will actually give you a better understanding. Maybe you won't have color mastered by the end of this class. Of course not. It won't be something like that. But I think this will give you a good foundation to then take another class that's more focused on color. This will be kind of like a good intro for it, where you start just talking about warms, cools. You start learning to observe color, which is really the big part of it, and then you can take that with you. But I don't think it would be something that I would say would inhibit someone from doing it. And I'm not just saying that because it's my class. I wouldn't, if it was something that wasn't going to be suited for you, I wouldn't say that. But I think it would be fine. I think you would probably learn quite a bit. And because you can paint right along with me and you can see the colors I'm picking, you can back up, go slow, and say, why is he putting that? If he's painting skin, why is he putting a blue in that area? It's like a weird blue. Why is he doing that? And then that'll start that process in your mind of seeing how I build up the skin or how I build up whatever I'm painting, and why I put that in there.
Right on. Um, by the way, are you doing Inktober?
Oh yeah.
You
I
are?
just I just got yeah, I just got the prompt list. I like to do the prompt list. My brother's gonna do it. I was talking to him about it the other day, and he said, "Are you doing Inktober?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I've got this whole." He's got a whole thing planned. He wants to do like 30 days of a story, of like this character that's going through this story or whatever. I said, "Oh, that's cool." I said, "I like to do the prompt list because it makes me uncomfortable to do the prompt list because it's not something
Mm,
I came up with or thought of, and I like having to work under those circumstances where I have to find something that fits with this theme that someone else picked,
right on,
and I
right on.
like that, and be creative and be interesting. So I'm gonna have fun with that. I love it. I'm not the greatest ink artist at all, but I really have a good time.
Hey, like learning new abilities, new crafts open up doors to whole new opportunities, right?
That's the thing, man. It's true. It's true. I had fun last year. That was the first time I ever did it every day,
I
and I did it every
remember, I
day
remember
last
you
year.
did.
Yeah.
Last year was the first time I did every single day for
Oh,
Inktober.
really?
Yes, for the first time. I never really had kind of like the want, so I kind of
Hmm.
just did it half-assed. But last year we started, me and my buddy Jim Bryson, we started another YouTube channel, like as if
Hmm.
one isn't enough. Um, it's called the Jim Bob Drawing Show, and we did
So
a
good.
whole entire year of drawings. Him and I, like, he would usually draw them and I would paint them. But through the month of October, we did one for every day. Uh, this year,
I
I'm
remember
not
that.
going to. I'm gonna be traveling, like, I think more than half the month. So my October is pretty much gone. Doing cool stuff though. Can I kind of mention a couple of things here? I
Yeah,
want to
do it.
mention I'm going to be going to this event I never seen before. It's awesome. It's called Playgrounds. Let me put it on the big
Playgrounds. Hmm.
screen. So it's called Playgrounds. It's in the Netherlands. This is somebody else organizing it, but it looks super, super cool. Uh, there are still tickets available, last chance for tickets, but um, the people that are going are a lot of people I'm really looking forward to seeing. One is Wouter Tulp. He's one of my buddies. Can't wait to see him. Um, uh,
He's so cool.
Carter
I
Goodrich
like
is
him.
going. You
Oh,
know,
nice.
Peter DeSev is going. I don't
Oh,
know if
nice.
Andrea Blasic is going. I believe he is. So that's going to be really cool as well. Loish, I believe she's going to be there as well
Oh,
as
nice.
just a ton of people. Just do it. I think I think it's going to be a really good event. I have a good feeling about it.
Oh, that looks great.
Yeah. So, oh, and the other event, of course, is after that. I'm going to LA for Adobe Max. I don't have it graphic to show you, but Adobe Max. That's going to be in LA, and Ron Howard is going to be speaking there. Tiffany
Whoa.
Haddish is going to be speaking there. Uh, Questlove is going to be speaking there.
Oh, nice.
What?
That's
What
awesome.
the heck? What the heck am I doing there? I don't know, but I'm going and I'm speaking there too. And then a little graphic I do have is for Dublin, October 20th, 21st. Stefan Martinier, Shannon Tyndall, the Black Frog, Igor Alban Chevalier, Sylvain Mark, Megan Brain, and Nathan Fowkes. They're going to be there. I'm going to be there. Chaos Dare is going to be there. That's going to be a really fun one too. So yeah, lots of really cool things happening in the works.
That's awesome.
So why don't we take on one last question? Okay.
Sure.
What do you do? This is from the Slido thing again. Slido's been great,
Hmm.
everybody. I hope everybody can get on it because you do not need to make an account or a username or whatever. You can just go at it and type in your questions. It's been really helpful today. So, Anonymous asks, what do you do to get out of burnout and get the fun back into working on art?
Mm,
That is a very good question and something that gets brought up again and again because we all feel it from every kind of point in our career.
for
We're
sure.
all vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I like I have a sort of a method for me, and I go to a museum. I go to a museum, and that for me gets me rolling again. And that's my old standby. I get there and I start seeing all these crazy paintings, and I see them in person. They're 30 feet high, all this stuff. It starts inspiring me, and I think just I think being around other artists or seeing other artists work for me is the thing that gets me out of it, because it's very easy to get burnt out. And I feel like that happens when you're on your own and you have sort of a myopic focus on what you're doing, and you just start like you're like a hamster in a wheel. And if you can get out and see other artists, and they're doing certain things and having fun, creating this other type of art that you don't do, and you get into it, you ask them questions, and it just gets you fired back up again. For me, that's what works for me. I think gets me out of it, and the community is really good that way. I couldn't be the artist up in the cave just painting these the old school idea of the artist. you
That's
know
pretty darn old school if you're talking about
yeah,
caves and shit.
it is yeah.
For a lot of people, what they tell me is that this channel, the YouTube channel that I got going, eh, that's a great way to kind of break out of a rut. And that is also kind of like one of the motivating factors to continue these streams. So put on a stream because we're always trying to be positive, always trying to, pump people up and everything. Another one for me, which I actually, do myself, is learn. Learning is the ultimate way to get
Right,
out of a rut because not only do you get out of a rut, you evolve and you get better at the
right,
same time. When you're learning stuff, one of the big things for me before was I didn't feel like I had any good ideas good enough that I wanted to spend time on and create a painting and put time into it. And so that for some people can be the start of their rut. And so for me,
Hmm.
taking a class, I don't need to worry about what am I going to paint now. I just follow the
Mm.
instructions. If John says paint an iron ball, then I'll just paint an iron ball, and try to
Right.
absorb all the info. Uh,
Or a bloody pear with dew on it, like what's on the screen right now. If I tell you to paint that, paint that.
exactly. Can you paint it? I don't know. Maybe I'll try. Another one is, like John said, get outside. And for me, I try to tie in these things. If you haven't noticed, I try to tie in all these things into my everyday life so that I'm always feeling motivated. I'm always doing something fun. So, YouTube channel, well, I'm actually making the YouTube channel. So I get to talk with, motivating people like
Right.
my buddy John, and others. Learning, I take schoolism classes myself, and then get outside. Are you kidding? I just said I'm going to be spending more than half the month this month away, outside, in LA, in Ireland, in the Netherlands. Am am I trying to boast? Maybe a little bit. But uh, the thing about it is that it was a conscious thing that I've tried to do all my art career. Spend time not just designing cool characters and cool video games and cool movies, but spend time designing your life. I know John is totally into that one. Um,
Totally.
you know, if you spend time kind of thinking about how do I want my life to be, and
Right.
be willing to spend a bunch of years to gear your life and
Hmm.
slowly kind of mold it into that life that you want, then all of a sudden, you could find yourself in kind of like a situation like me. Like, I have to go and travel to all these places with super cool artists and learn from them multiple times in a year. I have to check out these online courses. I got to, keep pumped and talk to all these motivated artists all the time. If you kind of design your life the way that you want it, instead of just letting life kind of guide you through however it's going to kind
Right.
of push you, uh, life gets a lot better. And with that, I think we're pretty much good. Do you have any last things, anything that I missed, anything that you want to mention, John?
I don't think so. I think you caught everything. It's an exciting time. I'm excited for the class to be rolling out. It's really fun. I'm glad to hear some good feedback from it already. That's really good. It's always nerve-wracking when you have a new class rolling out, you know. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
want to put out something that I think is good and have everybody be like, "No," but it's good. I'm getting good feedback now, so it's great.
Awesome. Well, that's it for us then. I hope you guys had a good time, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and then press the bell icon, the notification icon. Then you will know exactly when we are streaming live. Okay? And you will know every time we put out a new video. So thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks, guys. You're awesome.